welcome back to DevGameClub, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, Bika? Tosa Yesor Click? Tosa Sor?
Tim Longo. Wow, that is amazing.
Thank you. I've been practicing my Lizard Man.
Some translation there, huh?
Yes. We probably won't talk much about that this time, but I had the joke all ready to go, so I had to run with it.
Nice. That's good.
Yeah, we're talking about Ultima Underworld, of course, and those who watched on the stream or whatever. Actually, that reminds me of another topic that we can briefly bring up at some point. Streaming stuff, which makes it fun. Know that is Lizard Man speak for hi. Are you a friend or are you a foe?
I think they've said that to me. I just haven't quite gotten to the translation part. Yeah,
I haven't done the translation. Yeah, that is. I think that may be one of my favorite moments from the whole podcast. The whole time I've been playing these games, something that genuinely surprised me was doing the Lizard Man language stuff. But we will get back to that.
Oh yeah. Of course, yeah. I knew about that ahead of time, but at the time, I also remember back in the day, it just blowing my mind. You know.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It does get a little tedious just because there's a lot of it. And you're kind of going back and forth. You keep getting deeper and deeper into these trees of dialogue, and then you're like, "Oh, okay, I'm 4 entries in, and I got to go get some more words." But as a concept, it's brilliant, and I don't think I've ever quite seen anything like that. But let's not spend all of our time there, since you haven't even quite gotten there yet. So
yeah, we'll talk more about it next time.
Where would you like to start, sir?
Well, I wanted to start out because I hadn't gotten far enough in the first session. I didn't get to fully play the first level. I was about halfway through, and so the first story I wanted to start with, and I think it'll spark some of the topics and conversation that we've talked about in pre-show. But so I started back up and had to play the rest of 1, and so the first thing I did was go over to the Gray Goblin area, and started that sort of stuff. And, it was conversing with them and talked to the king and all that stuff, and kind of finding some of the relationship between the two. And again, we talked about it in the first episode, but one of the coolest hallmarks I remember playing this back in the day was the sort of, the race and species relationship and dynamic in this dungeon. You know what I mean? And it was and because I was a D&D player, and those sorts of stories would always come up, or try to come up if we were doing a good job when we were, tabletop and pen and paper playing. It was like the fact that this was so complex. And there were light versions of this in some of the the games we've mentioned, some of its influences, but it really never got as deep as I remember, and at least I attributed as a player. So when the gray goblins talk about the green goblins, and then the dwarves talk about knowing the lizard men and those sorts of things, right? There's these relationships that are hallmarks of these sorts of RPGs today. But anyway,
absolutely. And it's all based actually in the sort of lore of the game. And that ties into, I'd only bring that up because it ties into the direct story you're playing, in that this Sir Cabarrus has built these 8 talismans that you need to find, that it suggests that, it seems to suggest you're going to want to have all of those before you go maybe into some kind of final battle. I found a clue somewhere that seemed to suggest, go to the very base of the abyss, then battle your way back up to find the very key to your fortitude. And I have no idea what that means, but I wrote it down because it was written on a wall somewhere, and it seemed like it'd be something I would want to know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in this game where you're just walking around, you're finding things, and there's no quest journal, as we talked about last time. And in fact, I did go back to the King of the Gray Goblins to see if they would say anything about the fact that I killed the red spider who had a name. I don't know, some some she spider.
Oh,
they kept saying.
I killed that and didn't even realize it. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't they don't pick up on it. They don't. It's not a quest in that sense. Although there are some later that are. So there are quests in this game, and you can pick them up from dialogue. They're just not noted anywhere.
Yeah.
But
oh yeah,
they're
definitely going to
required
talk about
to
a couple
progress.
of those.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially the mines one. We should talk deeply about. But yeah, I just always sure. and to your point about Sir Cabrius, or however you say his name, like there's this sense of fully realized dungeon world, and he's this sort of legendary figure that everyone talks about, and it just adds so much depth. And my wife was just kind of watching me play last night, because I'm playing in the same room, and she was like, what are you doing? She was like, this reminds me back in the day when she was watching over my shoulder, 20 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, it looks like an old game, but I'm just as engaged as I was then, It's just so fully realized. And then the legend of this guy, and you want to just uncover this stuff. It's just the mystery of it. It just feels very, very close to a D&D campaign, back in the day. And so I think that's what blew my mind. But anyway, the quick story I'll finish here. So I was exploring the gray area, the gray goblin area, and talking to them, and I forget that maybe they asked me to do something. Maybe it was the spider they mentioned. And so I was kind of wandering around, and then I had accidentally found this sort of, in one of the sort of the bed chambers of the goblins, I found this hole. And I was like, I wonder what's down this hole. And I kind of accidentally fell down the hole and ended up on level 2.
Yes, so, I did that actually deliberately, but I saved before I did it, but I did the same thing. Yeah.
So yeah, this is a segue to thing I didn't mention last time about how I'm choosing to play the game this time. And as I try to do on the podcast and am trying to stay consistent with, I'm trying to play against type for games that I've played before on the podcast, just to keep things interesting for the discussion and also for myself. And so rather than playing a ranger and focusing on missile combat or being, save scummy and a completionist, I'm just kind of letting the game take me where it's taking me, and not trying to redo things or whatever. And so I'm playing a shepherd. I have no idea what a shepherd does, but I'm a shepherd named Brett.
Oh, nice.
And he has a lute, and he wants to be a bard, but he's not a very good bard. So he's a shepherd. And I took acrobat as my skill, which I have no idea what that does either. I don't remember. And so
probably means you took less damage from that fall, to be honest.
Probably, yeah. And I think I can jump pretty far too. But I'm kind of focusing on magic more than I usually do. Just kind of like my System Shock 2 playthrough, where I was, went totally psi, and so I'm kind of playing against type. But anyway, because of that, I rolled with it. I didn't reload. I just like, okay, I guess I'm on level 2 now. So I played most of level 2. At that point without going back up, because I didn't know how to get back up. But what happened is, as soon as I fell down there, I don't know, maybe 10, it looked like 10 gray goblins were down there, and they all started attacking me. And so I don't know if that was supposed to happen, or if I pissed them off, or they chased me, or what. So I basically just had to run away, and then just got embroiled with everything happening on the second level with the dwarves. But so I didn't even, so I went back up eventually to level 1 and finished it off pretty much fully. But it's fun. It's been fun to just let the game, like, I don't reload that often, unless I have to. And it's been fun to just see where the game takes me, instead of like super scouring everything. And there's a segue to a couple of different topics there with the magic system and the runes that I'll bring up later. But anyway, I just thought that was a funny thing that, it's like, oh, well, I guess this is happening. And I think because of that, I might have maybe leveled up a little faster, because I had skipped, to level 2, and I was killing, I got some good kills on some bigger things. And I feel like in one battle I leveled up twice while I was down there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that can happen. That may have happened to me as well. Maybe fighting a headless. Did you fight a headless in there or something?
I tried, but it kept breaking my weapons.
Interesting.
I don't think I killed one of those.
Wow. Okay, I killed all of those. Are you playing on easy or normal?
I'm playing on easy. Yeah, but Maybe my strength isn't, I don't know, but it broke a couple weapons. I mean, I probably could have kept at it, but once it broke like two of my weapons, I just said, well, I'm just going to run away because I don't, my encumbrance, like I'm not very strong, I guess. So I'm encumbered almost all the time. So I really have to watch what I'm carrying around. And I have a bunch of chainmail armor now. So I'm like even heavier. So,
right. Yeah, me too. In fact, I actually found some plate mail and I couldn't carry both, right? I couldn't like.
Yeah. No, I carry one set of everything.
I guess what I ended up doing was trying to drop the chainmail and then pick up the plate armor. And I dropped the chainmail, and that meant I accidentally dropped it in the water. And then I tried to pick up the plate armor, and I still couldn't pick it up.
Oh, shoot.
So and those are things that can happen in this game, is that, I accidentally dropped this and it's gone forever. Which is possibly a game breaker, right? I mean, it's fine. I'm level 10. I feel pretty powerful compared to the stuff around. I've gotten pretty good at using the magic appropriately in battle. Like I armor myself first, and then I ready a healing spell just in case I need it and things like that. So I've been pretty good at that. But anyway, there's a million topics to spin off there. One of the things I wanted to start with was the reminiscence of playing games of this vintage and older. And this was really dying out, I think, at this time, but actually playing and taking notes as you play.
Mm-hmm.
Taking notes of, I mean, as we've mentioned, there's no quest journal, so you might take notes just like, I need to do this. But for me, I also now have lists of things that I'm keeping track of. I have my spell sheet, which is, the spells that are in the manual, but you also find others and modifications to spells and things like that. So I'm making notations on that of like, I can also do this for the spell or whatever. I have a list of mantras. There are 3 in the manual, but I found 6 others that are much more specific. And then, of course, the Lizard Man tongue has a whole ton of definitions as well, and then just stuff that I've picked up, things about the talismans, and that I make notes of because I'm basically playing a week apart. I will forget some of these things, so I want to make sure that I write these things down, just so I can keep my own quest journal. But it's pretty wild. Pretty wild to be in that day and age. These days all of this stuff is sort of handled for you. Like, a good example in the same vein is that these days we wouldn't really have like 20 different keys that you have to keep track of. You'd have a key ring or whatever, and the keys would just go on the key ring, and you'd go up to a door and you either have the key or not, or whatever.
Yeah, you wouldn't even have to select the key. You just do it automatically open most of the time these days,
right. And that's I don't know how I feel about that trade-off, to be honest, playing this now, where it's like, you can imagine scenarios coming up where you run up to a door, but something's chasing you, and you're like, do I have the right key? And trying to find the right key, and basically having like a horror movie moment or like a dream sequence moment of trying every key in this ring when you've got like 30 keys to try to find your way. Do I have the right key for this door? Oh my God. And you try one and you try another one. Then you drop the key ring and then you pick it up and you try another one. While, I don't know, a headless bears down on you from behind. I can imagine having those things come up, and you miss out on all of that stuff when you don't have systems in place to allow them to develop,
Or just keeping track of what keys do what. There does seem to be some rules based on the key usage, right? I've found, at least on the first couple of levels. Like, of course, the one where you find the level you find the key on, usually you're going to use it on that one. But like, I think it's the gray keys, or the silver keys, whatever. The iron keys seem to all open the same kind of door, right? And then there's one key for like the dwarven doors, and then et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think the red key was just for those early areas, but but it's like, it's cool to have to, like you said, remember that stuff. And I remember when the game came out at the time, because I like I said, I'd already talked about playing at the Beholder and being a big fan. In fact, this game has kind of wanted me to, I want to actually go back and at least look at those games again, because I'm trying to I attribute so many innovations to this particular game. I wanted to go back and see what Eye of the Beholder was doing at the time before this too, to see if maybe they had innovated and I had forgotten and just kind of given the credit to this one. But the big thing for me, I remember that blew my mind was just annotating the map. Because Eye of the Beholder was grid based, so I had my graph paper out and I would just, draw the whole dungeon as I was going, and that's what you had to do. But in this one, not only did it auto map for you, but you could write on the map. And so it's like, so I just mark this thing up left and right. And because I'm encumbered all the time, I can't carry everything. So I'll just drop it on the floor and then mark what's there in case I ever need it again.
I do the same thing. What I end up doing is I end up using letters and then have a legend over on the side, just so I don't clutter up the map, but I can see what's going on in the map and things don't overlap. So I'll put an A next to a locked door and then just put over on the side A dot locked door. And then whenever I find locked doors, I just mark them with A. That's
smart.
At up and down ladders, same, or up and down whatever staircases, same thing. And then just anything else. Yes, if I drop stuff, I'll put dropped some weapons here, or whatever, those sorts of things. And that is great. Yeah,
it's fun to need to do that, and it's just everything's so automated. And I think we talked about a little bit about this when we had our bonus episode for Breath of the Wild. But it's kind of an interesting topic right now in open world games, because Zelda, and I finally got my Switch and I'm playing that much more deeply, that game, spending a lot of hours on it, probably when I should be playing this, but they don't hold your hand in that game, right? You can mark up that map as well and choose how you're going to direct yourself when you look at the map, and versus say a Ubisoft game that automates it all for you, or Witcher.
Right. Even as you pass by stuff, it'll just put things on the map.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for that engagement and that player agency just on the map, right? Because everyone's going to play differently and care about different things, and so why not let the player uncover that mystery themselves rather than kind of interface it, so
there's been, we could talk for hours about maps. Here's a few other games to kind of throw out there. Far Cry 2 having a sort of physical map that you can actually see in your hand, and look down at, and maybe I think it gets maybe auto marked up. I don't remember of an objective or whatever that might be next. I was thinking also of Miasmata, where the map is very critical. That's sort of an indie game made, I think, by a couple of brothers. I'll put their names in the show notes, but I'm pretty sure it's a couple of brothers who made that one, which is sort of has a sort of feeling like Lost in a sense. You're on this island, but there's also something terrifying out there that you have to avoid. And then, what was the other one I was going to say? Oh, zoot. Etrian Odyssey, which is a Nintendo handheld game lately anyway. I played the third one, I guess, and you actually in that you use the touchscreen and grids to make your own map in the game, but it keeps track of, you basically tap on grid sections to depict them as walls or not. So you end up, as you step through the grid, like an Eye of the Beholder style game, you literally are just tapping the screen to be like, oh, okay, I'm facing north. On my east, there's a wall. On my west, there's a wall. As you go through the dungeon, which is it really engages you in a way that auto maps don't. And so this one has kind of a lot of good things about it. The auto mapping is nice because the map is really complex and would be kind of hard to keep track of because it's not explicitly gridded.
It's very custom.
But it does allow you that, grab the quill and drop a note wherever you want. They do also have that weird thing where the map pin that indicates where you are casts a shadow.
Little touch.
I'm not crazy about that touch. When I first saw it, I'm like, what am I next to? I don't understand. And somebody in the stream, I think it was Brian Taylor, was explaining, that I think is the shadow of the pin that is you. I'm like, oh my God.
It sets it well, right? I mean, it makes it look, especially in this day and age, it makes it look a little bit more real, which I think is neat.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, it was like one of the first things I noticed when I opened the map. I was like, what's that? Like, and I closed the map again, like, oh, I don't see anything. And then I opened it up again. I don't know what that's supposed to be. And then I said, you dummy, it's a shadow.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, as a little bit of a segue to one of the other topics I wanted to hit was just the inventory system in general, and I mean, I guess it's maybe a bit much to call it an inventory system, but just the way that inventory is handled, let alone encumbrance alone, but just I had started off, one of the things that I didn't kind of just go with the flow on with this playthrough is my bag management. I'd started off kind of just very haphazard and not trying to pay attention too much, but my OCD kicked in. I had to organize. So I spent like probably 20 minutes just like getting my system down and bags within bags. And, I have the map case by now and I have a couple of golden boxes. And so there's a lot of cool, it's just very fascinating, the ability. And I also remember being impressed that it worked. I just had, coming from previous games at this time, just the fact that I could put a bag within a bag and that there was quite a bit of room in each of them, and how much, I guess, responsibility that they give the player to make sure it all works, because it just, it's the games do automate so much of that, like you said, these days, that it's like they don't respect the player's intelligence as much. Right, here it's like, no, it's on you. If you want a system or if you want to be messy with your bags and not be able to find something, that's on you, and this thing's, I realized too late last night that I think I have some deep, because as soon as I heard the opening music of this, like I said last time, I kind of had cold sweats. And I feel like one of the things that I have this deep-rooted anxiety for this game, now that I'm playing it again after so many years, I think something must have happened to me in one of my earlier playthroughs where I must have lost something critical, because the game doesn't keep track of it. And because I probably restarted this game probably 3 times before I ultimately finished it. And I think each time I probably hit some weird thing where it's like, and I'm having that anxiety again, where I'm like, oh my goodness, am I gonna, drop this in the water, or what happens if I drop it in the water, or is this important or is this not important? Is, what do I do with this thing?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is that one of the benefits of playing on stream is that I have some experts watching along with me,
right.
And so they'll say, "Oh, you're going to want to hold on to that. You'll thank me later." So there was a bottle of port or something that I was going to leave behind when I was trying to equip that better armor, and Mark Eldridge in the stream said, "Hey, you'll thank me later. Just go ahead and pick that up and put it back in a bag." The other thing is that
I drank that port.
Oh, good. Well, good luck.
It's all gone.
And so Tim might be starting again. I don't know if it's gating.
That's a bummer.
The other was that because I was a little disorganized, at one point I had all the keys in a box, and then inside the box I had a pack. Inside the pack I had a bunch of stuff. And I went to pick up something that I needed. I can't remember. Oh, I needed to. You may not have gotten to this yet, so I won't even say. But I needed to get a bunch of stuff. I needed a fair amount of weight encumbrance space. So I dropped the box with the keys.
Okay.
And then I left it there. I went and did the thing with the encumbrance, and then I kept adventuring. And I finally got to an area where I was battling some headless and some other things. And there was a guy nearby who had a sort of a safe space. So I went in there having gotten pretty beat up. I was like, oh, good, I'll rest. And so I went and I looked, and my bedroll was in the pack that was in the box with the keys, and it's all the way across the level. And I don't know if I can get there safely.
Yeah.
So I had that moment of, it wasn't that I didn't know where everything was. It was just at the moment I was like, well, I need this. I need some weight limit. And so I just dropped this box of keys. I'm like, I won't need those.
Yeah.
I know where these are. I'll pick them up before I leave the level or whatever. Because I left it kind of near where I was going to be leaving the level anyway. And I was like, I'll come back. And sure enough, I ended up needing that. And I was totally, I was like, I know I had a bedroll. Where is it? And then the penny finally dropped. I was like, oh man, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
So those are the sorts of things that can happen, is that you can lose track sort of in the moment trying to satisfy some other short-term goal. You can lose track of some other goals you may have. And it really asks the player to manage all that by themselves, both in the inventory, as you point out, but just all of it.
Yeah.
Is manage this stuff how you can manage, how you as a player, need to manage these things.
Yeah.
Which I really like.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we bring up Dark Souls a lot in this podcast because of some of the, like we talk about some of those old tenets that kind of come back with that game that people really seem to have really gravitated to and respect now. But this is just another one of those reminders where it's like we've lost some of that magic in the arms race to usability, and it clearly, to me, it's stuff we need to get back. And I think Zelda has some of those examples, and that new gamers who didn't play these games probably right at all may not realize the importance of what it is and where it comes from all the time. Maybe they do. Maybe they go back and play, but a lot of the younger ones probably haven't. And so it's good lessons to learn, I think, for me at least, to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a pendulum swing, right? Is that it's certainly previous Zeldas were not like Breath of the Wild as far as the map goes. So there's although there is some of that in Link to the Past, there's this sense that they've taken some of the good stuff that's involved in the old maps and just sort of streamlined it and just enough to maintain both some of the magic of marking up a map however you want to mark it up, but not make it so unending and sort of cumbersome as this is. I mean, here, if you make a mark and then you want to erase it, you've got to go click that erase thing, and then you've got to try to find the right place to click that. That's super it's cumbersome. It doesn't work real well. And it's, of course, that's having a pointer, right? A mouse, right? So it would be even harder with a controller. So some of that stuff has just been well adapted to a different sort of system. Yeah. But I mean, that's sort of the Nintendo way. Take some good ideas and streamline them in such a way that they feel more natural than maybe they have in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that there's multiple examples, and this is related, but maybe shifting a little bit, of just all the mysteries, like you mentioned, and all the different things you discover about this game, and some examples that they don't tell you about, right? Some examples are different ways to cure poison in weird ways, like you may have found it. I don't know if it's a spoiler for you, but leeches.
Yeah, I found the leeches. Somebody mentioned that actually in last week's stream. So
yeah, and I think I had a big memory of that, so I did it right away. But then, like, spiking doors, the fact that enemies will follow you through doors and that you can spike doors, it's like these weird verbs that are very much like, we did this in our D&D campaign, and we should be able to do this in this game. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which we know
exactly. That is such a that one in particular, spiking doors, is such a weird thing. That is a D&D-ism for sure. That's totally. And when I moused over the spikes, I thought they'd be useful for something else. I had no idea what they're going to be useful for, but I was like, I better hold on to these. And if you look at them, it'll tell you can spike doors with them or something.
Yeah, if you can examine them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I finally did that, and I'm like, I don't need these. I'm not going to be doing that.
Yeah, no, so. I dropped mine eventually too, and it's just sort of like these a little bit emergent tactics, which as we talked about the legacy of this game, and Looking Glass games, and like that sense of emergent gameplay, which was very much a cornerstone, of this lineage. And I think that's just a good example, like a small example of like, well, give them this and they can use it if they want to or not. And people might find interesting ways to use something like spiked doors, to kind of direct, although the AI here is very simple, so they're not going to really follow you far, but stuff that will really come into its own later in the lineage of these games, I would say. To kind of use the systems all against each other in different ways. That's up to the player. So you can see the underpinnings of that here.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things I find most fun in, especially in Fallout 3 and in Skyrim probably to some degree. But in Fallout 3, there were lots of traps that you could basically use. I mean, mines or whatever on the that you could pick up and then use against enemies, use the AI against itself. And those were things we would just call tools, player tools. And here it feels like you have a lot of those player tools. Some of their use may only really be in your imagination. Like it might make sense going into some area that feels safe, but to close and spike the door. I can imagine doing that. So far, I haven't really had a need, but maybe if I were playing on the higher difficulty and if I were really nervous about where I might need to rest more often, for example, and therefore need to rest in places that were a little less safe. So it hasn't been a thing for me, but with any object in this game, you can imagine a use case. And that's kind of neat. Yeah. Like I was imagining with the keys or whatever, you can always come up with I see how this could lead to a moment. And so that's just great. Some of that I think is just because we've been playing games so long and making games that we kind of we can be given a handful of objects and go, I can see how you would use this in a game, and what challenges I might derive around the objects I have. And I think that's sort of just naturally part of our DNA these days, you and I in particular, but just in general, I think, there's a lot of carryover there from other stuff. So, do you want to? I'd like to talk about a number of things. Maybe we should talk about the specific contents a little bit of the levels that we played.
I want to hit the dwarf section for sure. But yeah,
because other topics I think we can sprinkle through in later episodes and just sort of. Because I don't want to skimp out on any of the specifics of levels that might be interesting, even though I think there's plenty of systems to talk about. So the dwarf stuff.
Yeah, mainly because I feel like it's my and the lizard. Just because I haven't finished the lizard section yet, that will also I think remain to be it'll be a memorable one for me all over again because it was back then too. The dwarf one I always had fond memories of because it felt like it had a really good beginning, middle, and end to, like you said, there's not a quest log or a quest system, but there is, in that particular case, there is a sense of pretty clear what you need to do. And there's the thing that... like I said, fully realized earlier, but the other phrase I'll use is just a sense of place, right? I mean, I think the thing that I've realized I've become so engaged with when it comes to each of the specific levels so far is that you really get a sense of the sort of level design and layout and this sort of like civilization or districts, down. So you're kind of in which goblin area you're in or the human area, and then you're in the dwarf section, and of course dwarves have the mines, but the mines are, there's a monster in the mines, but then there's a cave in, and that kind of teaches you how to use how you're going to break rocks with the hammer, and and then the sort of level design in that mine section, specifically with the water, where you can kind of get yourself into a place where you have to jump into the water, and then of course there's monster in there, etc. But then when you have this sense that you're going on this quest to help the dwarves, and then when you meet I don't know what they call it in this game, but the beholder kind of character,
right?
And how terrifying that is. But it's just so, it's just a bunch of pixels, and but there's just that. In fact, he shot his magic missile or what have you at me before I saw him, And I had forgotten what the monster was from my old playthroughs. So I was like, I see that blue light coming at me through the darkness. And I was like, oh no, there it is. And I found him eventually, after breaking the rocks and all that stuff. And they, of course, the dwarves build it up, right? Because they block this area off because he was in there. So it must be a big deal. And then he kind of flies at you, and there's this terrifying moment. You're like, am I going to be able to beat this guy? And I, down the skin of your teeth, I definitely, skin of my teeth, I got him. But it was just a great full arc, with that whole district. And the dwarf area was cool. And there's a couple different characters in there that have some unique things to say. Even I think there's a human or two in there. So you see the cross-pollination of it. But I just liked that kind of quadrant because there was such a cool little mini story throughout that whole thing. And then it results in obviously in getting, I don't know if that's one of the talismans, but the gem cutting thing.
Right. I don't know what that's for, but I've held on to it.
It seems important. It's got a name, like the gem cutter of
coolness. COULNES.
Okay.
It's the gem cutter of coolness.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not.
I don't know. I don't know how important it is, but I'm still carrying it. Those monsters, by the way, are called gazers.
Gazers, right? Okay, that rings a bell.
Yeah. What's funny is that in Ultima Underworld 2, which I think I mentioned, maybe on stream, maybe not on the cast, but is a little bit more, more deadly. On the first level, there's a room with 2 gazers in it. 2 gazers.
Great.
When you go around,
they got up the ante on the sequel, right?
Exactly. You just get walloped in that room if you stick around, if you don't learn to run pretty early. So it's it's a thing. It was funny with the dwarves. The king was like, well, you got to talk to Shaq. So I went into every room in the dwarf area. And I couldn't find Shaq, but I talked to everybody else, learned some stuff, found some more mantras. Maybe I definitely picked up some things there, and then I went and wandered around sort of north of the place, looking still for Shaq. And what ended up being the case was that he was in the mines.
Yeah, he's deep in the mines in another place. There is a sign on the wall that says Shaq this way.
When you go in the mines, yes.
Yeah, in the mines. Yeah.
But I didn't even go in the mines because I had been told, oh, well, you'll have to go in there. You should talk to Shaq. And I just kind of made the connection of well, Shaq must not be in there.
Oh.
I need to talk to him before I go in. And it wasn't super clear. And when I finally went in there and there was that sign, I was laughing with the stream because I had spent literally 2 hours doing everything else on the floor and not finding Shaq. Finally, well, I guess we'll go do the mines now. I don't know what the deal is with that Shaq dude. And then I opened the door. I said, "Oh, Shaq, this way." What? So yeah, that was the whole thing. Oh man.
But I mean, he's a good example of just another fully realized wow, he's going to be able to repair stuff for you, and there's an anvil there, and they're just kind of peppering in some of these things that you'll be able to do throughout, and
right.
You
can use the anvil yourself, I believe, if you have a repair.
Repair. So I want to ask you. So you've been finding all the different mantras, and I've found quite a few too. Maybe not 6, but 4 or so. But every time I go to use them at the altar, at the at the shrine, it says I'm not ready to use them. When you go and use those alternate ones, not from the manual, I
haven't used the alternate ones, and the reason is I don't really necessarily want any of those things. The ones I have are for attack, barter, repair, eyesight, swimming, and protect thyself. And so I've actually been spending all of my levels as far as that goes on the main 3. What mana and lore, I basically have done half of them as that. Attack skills are the balance of the other half, and then a couple times I've done the practical skills. So it's probably something like 5, 3, and 2 in that distribution, or maybe 4, 4, and 2. I'm not really sure. But
Yeah, but it's like
I don't want to get into all the leveling up stuff because as time goes on, I'm kind of curious to see how that develops.
We should probably talk about that more later. Yeah, in the future. I guess that's true. You want to pick and choose. It's kind of reminds me of an early version of System Shock 2 to that end, because you can really specialize your spec. I know that's redundant, but you can really go down deeply into a direction. And in this game, you most likely would get yourself in a lot of trouble if you choose poorly. Because I think the level cap's only 16, right? So you don't...
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think the level cap is 16.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
So I think that said that in the manual. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's what it said, yeah. In the leveling up section, in the parentheses, it says, you I think 16. But hopefully that's right, but you may want to reread it. But yeah, so I mean, if that's... But... Okay, so every time you level up, you can use one mantra. Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm not keeping track of how many times I level. So every time I find a shrine, I just kind of, I do it until it tells me I can't do it anymore.
Right.
I usually do one of each, and so I guess maybe I've kind of half and half myself, or something with combat and magic. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I forgot about all that stuff. So. I don't know if I'm doing a good job then or not. I don't know what the advantage of a shepherd is either, so I have to look that up. Maybe
their special starting condition is they have higher luck, I believe.
Wonderful.
Yeah, lucky you.
Yeah. Okay. I wonder what that does.
You have picked the one thing that. Is worse than a bard, I guess. I don't know.
Well, that's why I did it. I was just like, what games have shepherds? No game. I might as well do that just to see. Maybe the other Ultima games.
That is so they have their thing is that they are as I recall they're humble, they have humility maybe in this sort of the 8 virtues of the avatar. I think theirs is each class corresponds to it corresponds to a one of those one of the 8 virtues, and I think the virtue for them is that
humility. So. Yeah, it's just that particular one is so nuanced that how you can actually fully realize that in a game like this, I don't know. Maybe in the dialogue trees or something, but I haven't really noticed humility being like an extra variable for my interaction so far. But
I can't really imagine that being super helpful.
I don't know about that, but maybe after I'm done, I'll look it up and see what the details are. I kind of want to see it through, but it's just think it was so unique.
It really is just starting points, so I don't think it's. I really don't think it's a big deal. I mean, the kind of whole point is that you can be anything once you start. You just kind of start with whatever bonuses you prefer, and in this case, you chose poorly. What are you going to do? All right, let's do one last. I'll do one last story. Actually, I had one story I wanted to hear from you from last time as well. For me. There's been because I'm playing a bard, at some point I came across a mandolin.
Yeah.
And you can play the mandolin.
Oh, okay. That's nice.
So you can literally you can use it, and then the 1 through 0 keys correspond to C major, C through C, D, and E.
What?
So you can actually play tunes.
That's amazing.
So when I first picked it up, I played Joy to the World, because I just happen to know that one kind of off the top of my head. And it uses basically the whole C scale, but I know it uses those 8 notes. And then in my second day of doing it, whenever I would win battles, I would play the Final Fantasy fanfare. Da, 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 da.
Are you serious? Oh my gosh.
I did that. I also played the Chocobo song once. So
that's perfect for streams. I mean, that's like built in such a weird historical backward facing way, built for streaming.
It is so strange. It's really hard to it's because I have the new keyboard, which is very
right.
it's got the mechanical keys, so it's wicked clicky and everything. It's not super. I mean, it's probably more sensitive than I'm used to in some ways, but it doesn't feel like it rebounds super quickly. Like, it's very hard to play the notes like quickly. So getting the rhythms right is basically impossible. So I'm basically just playing the notes, but it was kind of fun to fiddle around with that. So.
That's neat.
Yeah.
I found the mandolin because my shepherd is named Brett and he wants to play, but encumbrance got the better of him. So he's like, well, I'm throwing this out. I don't have room for this. So I don't know.
I always have it carried in one of the slots on my body. So
of course, you have to.
It's up there, one of the shoulder slots or whatever. Right. Last time you had said you had a hoarding story. Do you remember what that is?
Yeah, well, so the other thing that I do feel like I'm happy that I'm giving myself permission on is I'm a completionist, as we've probably talked about, and using an example of, say, like Witcher 3 or something, right? Like I hoard and find and take everything, and I'll sell stuff, of course, but like my chests or my caches are full of everything that I've collected. And so because of the anxiety I had back, when I was younger and I played this game, every time I basically would designate a hoarding room on every floor. And so what I would do, and this is probably why it took me so long to finish the game, is everything I found, because of encumbrance, I would ferry it over to that room, and basically everything on that floor that I wasn't carrying was in this hoarding room on every floor of the game, is my memory.
Nice.
And that's, I think, another part of my anxiety, because I notice now when I put stuff down in a room or I throw stuff out of my inventory, I'm always worried, because I don't know if it's a sorting thing or what have you, but like if you have a lot of things in one room, it doesn't really handle it that well, and
it gets hard to pick individual things up. And
I can't imagine like the game, and you'd have to tell me more on the technical side, but if you there's got to be a limit or something. Like, how many things could you put in a room? So I just remember these piles and piles of things in these rooms when and this is in my memory, it probably wasn't that bad. And the thing is I don't think I ever even went back to them and used them.
Of course not.
But it was this thing of like, what if I need this? And so, I would just put it in this room, and you just go in this room and it would just look like a nightmare of things, of just pixels, but I had to do it on every single floor. And I would mark it on the map, of course, and everything. So that's my little story about hoarding. And basically the whole floor was empty, right? Of literally, like
there was no stuff anywhere else except one room.
Bowls, bones, just plants, everything I could pick up was in that room.
Oh man.
Because I couldn't believe I could do it, coming from like Eye of the Beholder or something. It was like, they're letting me put things down in this play, in an analog way rather than like this grid-based way. It was just blowing my mind. So anyway.
Right. All right. Well, let's take a quick break and then come back and do a little feedback and talk about next time.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We're, of course, still talking Ultima Underworld. I wanted to throw out a few things. First of all, some shout-outs to some folks coming in on the streams. Mark Eldo, and I know John Caboose, also known as Bjorn, dropped in at one point. McKendy, Brian Taylor, Moss, just this huge crew of folks. And then a few at the end who just shouted out there, "Oh, hey, nice stream," as we were closing down, who I didn't even know were there, because I don't watch myself. I don't know how many people are in there, but always feel free to say hello. If I didn't shout your name, apologies. I didn't write them all down or anything. So, but I love having the folks. I do it. I've been playing on the weekends for 3 to 4 hour sessions, and and it's been a lot of fun to have people there that we can just talk about whatever, and I can play goofy music for. Trying to work up a couple more tunes for this weekend, so got that to look forward to. Couple other things. Tom Francis, who is a former game journalist, now a game developer, who made Heat Signature most recently, and before that, a game called Floating Point and Gunpoint was his kind of breakout first title.
Yeah, he's doing some amazing stuff. I used to listen to him on the PC Gamer podcast.
Oh, right. Crate and Crowbar, that one?
I don't remember if it had title. I just thought it was the PC Gamer.
All right, he also was on one called
the
Crate
PC
Crowbar.
Gamer UK podcast.
Oh, okay, yeah. Back when he was still a journo. Yeah. Anyway, he wrote an article on Rock, Paper, Shotgun maybe a couple weeks ago now, but it's about immersive sims and sort of emergent narratives that come out of them. Nice short little write-up about how the systems work to generate them. Something we'll probably talk about ourselves, and we've kind of been hinting around today with talking about situations that could arise, even if they haven't specifically arisen. But how we sort of see those as possibilities in the space of stories that could be told from a game like this. He kind of goes into that into some detail. So I think for people who are interested in that sort of thing, that's worth reading. I also wanted to shout out to Mark Eldridge, who was also in the chat, for sending a fairly detailed email about the audio and pointed me in the direction, and there'll be a link in the show notes, to how to make the audio a little bit better. Less MIDI and the kind of piano footsteps and all that stuff. I will. You might want to check that out as well, Tim. Although you're not playing it for a crowd. The crowd was like, "Oh my god, this audio," and it is a lot better. And the musical instruments even change. Before I was playing a mandolin and it sounded like a trumpet, and now it sounds. Well, I don't know what it really sounds like, but it doesn't sound like a trumpet anymore. It's an improvement. And then I'll have another link in the show notes from friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, who sent one today about a Thief interview with I think it's with Paul Neurath. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. Yes, it is. And so that's another one. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention before we get on to email proper is a shout out to Mark Allen Garcia, who has been tweeting awesome little mock-ups with us. First in Metal Gear images with our faces in as Campbell, I guess, and Snake. There was one with us in monocles and a top hat, and you with a gigantic mustache.
They're amazing.
And then also one. Where he put my face on He-Man's body. So it's been pretty entertaining over there on Twitter at DevGameClub. So for those who don't follow, I do retweet those when they come in, and they're often quite amusing. Anyway, so I'm going to throw it over to you with the first email sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. What do you got?
Subject Looking Glass Studios bonus content from Chris Mead. I'm very excited you guys are playing Underworld, and I'll be interested to see who you get for the interview. I wanted to plug a 10-episode podcast series put out back in 2012 by Gambit/MIT, I guess. It looks like it's MIT based.
It is. It's a MIT program of some kind. It's been a while since I looked up what Gambit's.
So it looks like they have a Looking Glass Studio specific series, on that studio. The discussions are fairly in depth and range from pre-Underworld through to Thief. Even with the later games, a number of common themes come up that are relevant to Underworld 1 and 2. I don't imagine you'll have time to listen to all of them, but perhaps other audience members might. Thanks as always for the pods. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I'll put that.
Put that on my my art.
Yeah, Cambridge is of course where Looking Glass Studios was, so it's kind of easy, and that's also where MIT is. So they would have been sort of down the street from one another, I imagine, or at least nearby. So it's all kind of tied together there in the Boston area. on one side of the Charles or the other, I suppose. Yeah, so totally interesting. I used to listen to Irrational had a pretty good series as well. That I liked a lot, and some of the same people who make these sort of games were making whatever BioShock at the time. So I have the other one. This one's the subject is a sneaky mail. It's from Philip Stephacius. Sorry, Philip. I have no idea if that even is your real name. It says, "Hey guys, I started listening to you during your Final Fantasy IX run, thanks to Kotaku." There's another quarter for those guys. "And as a Metal Gear fan, I was happy to listen to you playing MGS. I thought about playing along, which would be my first time playing the English version, as I just played the German version with its infamous voice acting. I was also interested in hearing your thoughts on Metal Gear Solid, because in my spare time, I'm tinkering on a 2D stealth game, like old school MSX2 Metal Gear with Game Maker. I make some progress, and I recently implemented a lighting system which influences the visibility of the player. What gives me the most trouble, however, is level design. I have some basic ideas of areas I want to make, but I have problems when it's about specifics. It's like the whiter the paper is, the more I have problems to get started. Have you guys any advice? Also, do you have any favorite stealthy levels?" Coincidentally, GDC, the other GDC, the conference, uploaded a YouTube talk called Level Design in a Day, a series of first steps, overcoming the digital blank page, which might be very handy for me. Greetings from Germany, Philip, a.k.a. Donnie. So yes, Philip, maybe not even your real name. Who knows? So the level designer here is not me. That is Tim. So I'm mostly going to throw this his way.
I'm sure you have some thoughts, though.
I do have a thought. So, but do you have anything that you can?
Yeah, that's a humdinger. I mean, level design is such its own discipline, and it's hard to be kind of thinking on the fly. I guess the first, which maybe is kind of obvious, I don't know how helpful it really would be, or that you've already thought about it. But the first thought that came to mind as you were reading the mail, it comes down to the obvious thing that I feel like the good stealth games do better than the ones that are not as good, and that is using level design as essentially onboarding for the stealth mechanics, right? Because and then also the combination of those. And so one thing that I would just encourage is that, it sounds like he has a lighting system in there, and there's probably a lot of different rule sets that he's building within his game. But as much as excited as he probably is to design the levels where they're all interacting with each other, for like the first, I'm picking a random number, but for like the first 10 levels or something, or 5 levels, each of them should really just be focused on one thing at a time, and not to kind of overwhelm not just yourself as a level designer, but the player as well. And I feel like, we talked a little bit about that with Metal Gear, and toward the end, they kind of went off the rails a little bit for level design and stealth. But I just always appreciate and I appreciate when that kind of and I think Thief did a pretty good job of that over time. And he asked about sort of some of my favorite stealth levels. The one that always comes to my mind that I think is actually a pretty controversial one from Thief is the one where you're having to eavesdrop and follow. Remember that one where you're following these guys that are walking through the city, and the tension that one had, and I think I loved it so much because it was a really good focal point, and you really felt the fantasy fulfillment was really pure in that, because you felt like this guy who was lurking, and they would kind of stop and kind of look behind them and stuff. And so there's this good paranoia. There's also an interesting similar level in Metal Gear 4 that Brett hasn't gotten to, that's very kind of like John le Carre espionage kind of, that's similar, where you're kind of you're walking through these, I think it's Prague, German, like Prague, not German, but I think it's the city is Prague, and in streets in this very, very like noir kind of way, and it's got another kind of good stealth feel to it. Those are ones that come to mind. There's so many good ones though. I'd have to keep thinking. But anyway, that's, I guess, without knowing your mechanics and stuff, I guess the thing I would say is, a little goes a long way. So kind of ease them in, because I think that might help your writer's block some too. Just focus on one thing. That's something I always appreciated about the VR missions in Metal Gear. They did a really good job at
very self-contained,
and you just realize that if you have good systems and mechanics interacting for stealth, the levels don't have to be that complicated. You can do a lot with a little. So I guess that's kind of the advice I'd throw out there. Without knowing.
I mean, to reinforce at least the tutorialization part of that, I feel like Mark of the Ninja does that very, very well. There's basically, it's a 2D, it's not exactly screen-based, but it kind of is. It's not fully a side-scroller, and it's not fully single screen-based. There's kind of a little fuzziness at the edges there. But in the first several screens, they're introducing like, oh, this is how the lights work, and this is what you can do with them. This is what you could do if you have a stone or whatever to make some noise, or this is how you go through trapdoors, or this is, just like one at a time. And then even by the end of that first level, you can be doing all those things fairly fluently. While it's also teaching you the things about how the audio is visualized and all that stuff. I actually tackle design in kind of a different way. And I say this mostly because it's something I really like to have as a programmer trying to implement stuff necessary for a designer to implement their vision. But for me, it's really helpful to have like a moment that is an intersection of some systems, or just something that you think would be cool, that would work well with your sort of game themes or whatever, and to work back from that. So, I want to have a moment where I sneak around the sides of this box and a guy's going the other way. Well, then, okay, how do you get to the box? So now you need to figure out how do you get to the box. But it gives you like this target to work backwards from, for the moment that you want them to actually have. You can even sort of see that in the beginning level of Metal Gear Solid, where I want the player to go up this elevator. Well, okay, so they're going to have to get close enough to the elevator basically to trigger it coming down. Oh, but then there's going to be a guy in there, and there's this series of dramatic things that happen around this core idea of just like, I need to get from A to B, so they can exit the level basically. And a lot of the stuff in stealth is that it's figuring out what are the patterns that I'm gonna use to my advantage, where are the blind spots, are there timing things that I can do, like the two spotlights on top of the helicopter pad is just a pure timing, like, and having the gumption to chase after one spotlight that's moving away as the other one's approaching, to get in there. So it is lots of just little moments like that, I think, that you can string together, and make the systems and play out of that. So I don't know that helps with things like geometry, but for me, it's at least a starting point. I mean, it's stuff that I asked you for even Republic Commando, like, just give me some ideas for how this thing plays out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And I like that.
And I still ask that today. Literally on the project I'm working on now, I've asked Nels, like, well, describe for me a thing that could happen and give me some more of those. Mm-hmm. And it really helps me as a programmer to develop the systems or hooks for systems that will be needed to support that. But it also works to help build up levels themselves. So
yeah, I like that. That's good. I do remember our conversations about that. And Brett is he's a very client-based programmer, and I think we've always appreciated that about him. So it's a good example of his thought process for that. That we captured it on air. And I think, kind of piggybacking off that, I think the thing that stealth games really benefit from a level design perspective, and this is level design in general, that's something that I feel like I probably learned the hard way as a level designer, and I guess I try to impart on people, and it's tricky because sometimes you don't have your systems and mechanics in place when you're when you're designing levels all the time. So it definitely is hard for some people to achieve this on big teams. But the thing that I think level designers can be a little pig-headed on, and they do hit some of that writer's block, is it's really not about the level design, the geometry itself in a way. Like you need, level design is a merger of level and systems and mechanics, right? So your levels should be driven by how those intersections are going to be how those intersections are going to happen, rather than, oh, I want to make this cool level and I have this idea for this geometry. It kind of needs, in my opinion, needs to come from the other direction. Like what's the gameplay and what's the level that reinforces that? And that's why I used his example that he had of like light-based gameplay, and that will imply line of sight and like Brett said, timing and things like that, I assume, because it's probably spotlights or something like that, or flashlights. I just think sometimes level designers get into their head that it's like, well, I want to make this level because I have this idea and it's, a perfect idea. But really you should start with what the gameplay systems are and then build levels around that, because they need to merge really well.
As far as my favorite stealthy levels, I really like, I can pick anything from Thief or Thief 2. There is also an eavesdropping one in Thief 2 where you're eavesdropping on a meeting and you have to stay near to this door where you can hear the meeting going on, but there are guards patrolling. So you kind of can't get too far away from it. But you can't just stand there because there's basically a light right on top of it that you can't put out. So it's very tense, and you're trying to time when you're going to move away so you don't miss too much of the conversation. It's a really interesting dynamic in a very contained space, and that's really neat. And then the other one I was going to mention, they don't really have names, so I can't really point out exactly what it's called. But in Alien Isolation, which isn't purely a stealth game, really, I don't know what you'd call it, but it isn't. It involves an awful lot of stealth, however, because you want to be quiet so that the alien doesn't pick you up and find you and murder you in some horrific fashion. There's a section just off of this sort of main lounge area where there are several like access tubes, and the sound they chose for the access door opening, and they open on proximity, and that proximity you might not actually have it in your field of view. It might be off to the side. So you'll hear suddenly this sound that sounds an awful lot like the alien breathing or something like that. It'll make this sort of hissing sound. It's like the release of some gas or something. And it's terrifying. Just in the level design of where these things are placed and how you're triggering them, even though you can't necessarily see them or aren't looking at them. So you have this moment of panic as you move around that the thing is coming. That is a game that maybe has too much tension in it, to be honest. That game was exhausting to play because there's not a lot of downtime. But that one section I remember just being absolutely terrified of because of that. And there were lockers you could hide in and things like that. So occasionally you would have to hide, and the alien would walk by and kind of look straight at the locker, and you'd be like, oh no, doesn't know I'm here. And sometimes it did. And that was the end for you. But it was an interesting area. And had lots of the systems on display in kind of a fairly simple utilitarian space, which I also kind of like, is that it's not a big set point sort of area. It's just, or set piece rather. It's just a couple hallways and a few rooms, and it's terrifying. So it's really interesting that they could achieve that much. So thanks for the emails, Philip and Chris, but also Mark, who sent in the instructions for me, and like I said, those will be in the links, and Aaron's note as well. So I appreciate all of that. We both do. It's great to have your questions. Again, you can send those to devgameclub@gmail.com. I guess that's it as far as all of that goes. I guess we talked last time about what we'd be doing, which is levels 4, 5, and 6. Is that correct? Do I remember that right? Yeah, because there's 8 total, right? So I'm kind of terrified now, knowing that I have 10 levels. That means I only have 6 left. I guess I missed that, and I did look that up while we were chatting. And in fact, there is a level cap of 16.
I think I'm at level 8 right now. But even not even having finished level 3, that still seems like I'm high. Maybe because we're playing on easy. I don't know why it's
right. Yeah, I don't know how that shakes out, and I don't know. One thing we may have to talk about at some point is like numbers in this game.
Oh, I have a funny story about that later too. An admission on air. I'll save that for next episode. Okay.
So there's a little teaser for next time.
I have a confession. I have a confession to make about the numbers of this game.
I'm writing this down. Confession. Because I don't want to lose track of that.
Yeah.
So we'll play 4, 5, and 6. I will probably again stream Saturday and Sunday of this coming weekend. You can find that at twitch.tv/Brett Douville. No underscore there. However, you will find an underscore in my Twitter handle, which is Brett_Douville, and his is
at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And, of course, you can find the podcast at DevGameClub and on the web at devgameclub.com. I guess that's all we have for tonight, so thanks so much and good night.
Good night.